Hello and welcome. We are gathered here today to talk about the 10 laws of high performance collaboration. If you're familiar with us and have been around for a long time, then you might think that sounds familiar. This has been a topic that Mickey and co-founder of Conversant, Richard Reinashek, started talking about over a couple of decades ago. And it turns out the topic is still relevant today. So we wanted to bring those laws into the current day and see what there is to say about it that might be relevant to all of you now. So I'd like to start with just what do we mean by high performance collaboration? And why does that matter? Why is it something that's worth spending as much time as we're about to spend on it?
Well, we mean it's people working together to accelerate the creation of value. In other words, producing something together with less time, money, and stress than they could disconnected. So that's our starting place about what we mean.
And I'd love to add in and a little more joy in the work. I say often we spend way too much time working, all of us in our lives, for us not to find joy in that time together. So I love when we talk about less time, money, and stress. And I'd also just love for there to be more joy in work. And I do think that that comes from people actually collaborating in a way that they feel really proud of and successful in.
Well, as we know, our beloved colleague, Anne Marie Allen, loves to say, if you want to understand great performance, follow the joy. So if there is a huge breakthrough in terms of diminishing the time, money, and stress it takes to produce something, I think it's because joy's driving it.
Right.
People's love of the work, love of making a difference, enjoying being able to see that they left things better than they found them. All of that can be joyful.
Well, I think that joy and work don't often go together for a lot of people. I also think people might be more familiar with low performance collaboration or the not so fun experience of collaboration. Why do we think that's the case? What makes this so hard?
Well, on the one hand, I think humans are meant to be in community together and meant to actually work and collaborate together. So that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are an awful lot of things both about human nature, which we'll get into, and organizational design that make that collaboration really challenging and that you actually have to be much more thoughtful about it. I think we'd love to say, just throw people in a room together and they'll be great. Maybe. Sometimes. And I think we'd love to think that that's the natural state. And actually it takes a little more intentionality than that, which is why we're going to spend so much time on it. And that intentionality actually requires all of us in it, because I don't think one of us being great at collaboration is going to be sufficient. So,
yeah, I think that part of the reason that it can be difficult is that we live in a time, now this could be a very big slice of time, where people tend to be measured and rewarded individually. Even the idea of heroism. Mm-hmm. And that means that we're oriented towards me first, rather than us first, and then where do I stand in it? So I think there's this constant pull between what I want and what it's possible for us to do together. And managing that pull is part of what we think is important in these laws. One of the ways we know it's low performance collaboration is people complain about it. So last year, I remember having a meeting with an executive who was introduced to me by somebody who said that their executive team collaboration was much stronger. And he said, well, because I respect, name fill in the blank, he said, I wanted us to have this meeting, but I want you to know I think there's too much collaboration. And I said, could you just explain to me what you mean? He said, well, everybody thinks they have to be in on everything and it makes everything slow and everything's hard. And I said, okay. And that's not what we mean by collaboration. Because we say the test for collaboration is how much you're able to produce per unit of time, money, and stress. So anytime people are saying collaboration is slowing and problematic and okay, well, let's say this in a really straightforward way, you're not doing it right.
Which is a great segue into how to do it right. But we also talk about the difference between value and waste, and that's very much related to how we were just talking about your experience of collaboration. So how would we distinguish valuable work, effort, collaboration versus wasteful? What's the value, what's the waste?
Well, very simply stated, value is something that customers, investors, donors, if you're in a nonprofit organization, are willing to pay for, that employees or associates are willing to provide. Full stop. Mm-hmm. And waste is everything else.
Everything that was happening that we wish we didn't have to pay for.
And so we will often say, if you have had a meeting or you've run a project and you get to the end of it and you think, would the people that are actually paying us, would the customers be glad that we just did that work? Mm-hmm. Is the test for value. And are employees actually called to do that work? Is the test for value. Now, this can sometimes be a little bit provocative because you'll see that there's no middle ground in that. Mm-hmm. There's no neutral. And I think for high performance collaboration, there is no neutral. You're either creating value or you're creating waste. So that meeting that you get out of and you think, yeah, that should have been an email, that to us is the definition of waste.
Years ago, we did an offsite in New Zealand for an Australia-based company that was really concerned about the turnover in their executive team because they'd gone through an acquisition and a divestiture, and it ended up with an executive team that wasn't the same people who had been working together for years. And they'd had about 9 months, and the CEO was not satisfied with their level of collaborative achievement. So we were working with them on that. And one of the things we recommended, because we'd spent about 2 months with them, putting in place some of the things that we'll be talking about later about how you connect with each other in a way that's effective and enjoyable and productive. And so when we got to this big offsite in New Zealand, they wanted to have one part of it that's just the executive team, and then their top 60. We recommended that the top 60 be in an arc around the room, observing them having their executive team meeting. Because in a way, they're paying for the existence of this executive team with our time, our effort, our commitment. And it was really impressive because first the CEO really jerked at that idea and said, that could be embarrassing. And I said,
good test.
If you'd be embarrassed for the people who you want to trust you to observe your work. So now, if there's issues of confidentiality, sometimes there's legal issues, there's fine. But let's say the agenda is not going to include those kinds of things. It's going to be what's up in the business and how do you work together to actually be effective in the face of that. And they ended up saying it was the most productive development experience they'd ever had to a person. Because they were so conscious of, we need to live up to who we need to be for these people. And I think that was a great value test.
Well, and I think valuable high-performance collaboration actually has that happen without people being there. It's physically in the room, because you're keeping that in mind all the time about what is the impact that this work is going to have on others in the organization and beyond. And I think sometimes our petty differences get in the way of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well,
I remember being petty. I just once or twice.
Sure. Uh-huh. Well, today we are going to be introducing 10 laws that should help guide you towards more valuable, high-performing collaboration. And our invitation is that you think about those as a way for you to influence there being more value, not a way to point out where there is not value or where, oh, that's waste right there. I listened to this podcast. Then they told me you're being wasteful. That's not what this is for.
From personal experience, I don't recommend.
Yeah, no, does not actually
work.
Itself wasteful.
Doesn't work so well.
Yeah, the purpose of this is not a new basis for accusation and blame.
No, but one of the reasons that matters is because we believe that every person in an organization, every person on a team, whether you're a leader, whether you have a positional authority over others, actually has the ability to influence whether there's more value or more waste going on. So we did want to touch on, before we go over those laws and get into the meat of it, What do we have to say about power so that people can have that on their minds as they're listening as well and place themselves as a source of power?
As we go through the laws, there's going to be lots of places where we're talking about power because it does impact our ability to collaborate. And we do see that there are 3 different ways that people can exert power in a system. We put them in 3 buckets anyway. One is through positional power. So that's the things that are granted to me based on my title. I do hold the title of CEO. So that means that there are certain things that I have the authority and ability to execute that others in the organization can't. So position power. Information power. So information power is who has access to information, important data in a system, and who can actually decide who has access to that. So Mickey is the founder and one of the primary shareholders, has tons of information power beyond position power, but he also has tons of information power because he has all the information about our particular organization. Folks in HR often have lots of information power also because they have access to so much information through the system. People in finance, tons of information power, whether they actually have position power or not. But then there's credibility power. So this is your ability to influence based on who you know, based on the credentials that come in the door with you, and also based on your ability to create conversational impact. And so that's the one that we think is available to everyone all the time. It's also the one that's the most renewable because you can actually make that change in the moment, in a meeting, in a conversation. I'm probably not changing my position power in the middle of a meeting, and I might not be changing my information power in the middle of it, but I could change my ability to actually be influencing through the conversations that we're having.
We think in each of these 3, the question is, how do you use that power? And does it create value or waste? Which we'll get to. Because there's a whole lot of waste that can come from a misuse of position power. There are people who withhold information, so they're the only ones who know. That can end up producing a lot of waste. In credibility power, the waste comes from thinking that my lack of information or position power takes away from my ability to cause connection. And we say everybody has the capacity to make the connection more valuable that you're in a given moment. It doesn't mean it's the same thing as position power, and we'll talk about that as we go through all this.
And I think it's important in the context that you were offering, MROs, around the ability to generate value from any seat at the table. I think too often we look to the person who has the greatest position power in the room from a hierarchical standpoint, and we don't actually recognize that any of us can shift the conversation in any given moment to create more value. And that's what we're really inviting everyone as we go through these to think about where's my ability to actually shift how this team is performing to create more value and, again, more joy in the work. And I think that can happen in any given moment from anyone in the room. And the waste of credibility power is not actually seizing those moments.
Right.
Great. So we're going to tee up all the ways that you can influence things going well. We have 10 laws to offer. What do we mean by law?
The particular meaning here is the one that in philosophy is called natural law. And in a lot of philosophical writing, it's contrasted with societal law. So a natural law is a principle common to the nature of being human. A societal law is a rule made up by people in a certain segment of society. So we have spent, I shouldn't say we, I have been working on this for near 40 years. We, together about 20?
I don't like saying that either.
Is it around 20?
It's actually 25.
Really? Okay.
I always know because it's however old Grace is.
Oh.
Because I met you when Grace was a baby. So
Wow.
25, which
All right.
I don't like saying.
So we've been down this road. And one of the things that we pay attention to, having worked in hundreds of organizations in countries all over the world, what are the things we found to be true across all those societies? And that's what we mean by natural laws. They're things that are just in the domain of human connection for us as true as water is wet.
And I think an important distinction inside of that, which you just touched on, is societal law is like if you break the law, there's something that's going to happen from a retribution, punishment sort of standpoint. I think what we're saying here with natural laws is when things start to break down, it's because one of those laws is not being treated as true. Right? Is we're not actually so we're not actually operating true to the nature of being human with one another. And so there really is an opportunity to make a pivot if you can look at, well, which law might we have just been acting contrary to that would help us to actually get back on track.
I think
So there's
one
no
of the most,
punishment coming in.
right.
Yeah.
I think one of the most powerful ways people can use the 10 laws is anytime you notice, this just feels too hard. We're spending too much money for what we thought we were going to get. We're spending too much time for what we thought we were going to get. I feel too stressed out and put upon that anytime it feels like we're exerting way more of our resources than we're getting a return on, what I do is I stop and take a breath and say, wait a minute, what natural law is being violated? And it's amazing to me how in those moments, by just stopping, taking a breath, and looking, I go, oh.
Yeah.
And then we go to work on applying that law. So that's why we say natural laws. Another reason for me, not in just the pristine philosophical definition, that I say natural, something that I do all over the world. I've done it over and over and over again when I'm with a group that I've never been with before. And we're going to work on some of our basic principles of connection and leadership as an active connection. I start by asking people in the room to just take a minute and write down the 3 to 5 most important commitments in their life. People can do that really fast. And then I'll say, okay, now looking at those 3 to 5 commitments, please put a check mark by the ones that you cannot fulfill without some sort of collaboration, coordination, cooperation. People do that. And I'll ask, what percentage of the most important commitments in your life did you just check off? It's usually between 80 and 100, people will say. So that tells me it's natural.
So we are going to give you a sense of what all those 10 laws are here so that you know where we're going and what might be of interest to you. But the invitation is for you to think about this for yourself. If you're a leader, if you're on a team where you're in a challenging collaborative environment and you would like some help or insight, if you would like to bring these to your team, it's a great exercise in inviting a conversation or sharing some sort of common language around a thing so that people can go to work and practice together. We will be including resources at the bottom. So in the information section, description, if you're watching online, if you're listening, then in the show notes. And you can use those as well as extra help in your effort. And would you walk us through the 10 laws, please?
I will. And one of the things we'll give you in the show notes is your own version of what I have in front of me, just so you have a little summary. The first law is the law of teamwork, which says the source of teamwork is a common future. And we will be delving into that. The second is the law of listening, which says the test for listening is learning. We consider that to be an unusual and powerful test. The law of connection is the conversations are the work. That human beings live in conversation. And the quality and timing of those conversations govern how well we're connected. The law of authenticity is pivot to purpose in the face of fear, threat, and disappointment. So we say authenticity is an issue of agile devotion. Life will get in the way of us being true to our most important commitments. How do we pivot in those moments? The law of presence. We say that all improvement begins with what's present, not with what we wish was happening. And so what allows us to actually be fully connected to the moment we're in as a basis for producing value? The law of inclusion. That law is differences plus trust equal brilliance. How do we actually search out the value in our differences? Because what causes exclusion is actually making a difference with me illegitimate. So we'll work on that together. The law of resistance. Where you feel resistance, do research. So if I'm resisting you or you're resisting me, there's something in there that has caused us to be careful around each other, to maybe even be slightly threatened. And we'll look in what causes that and what do you do to fix it. The law of learning says learning does not come from experience, it comes from reflecting on experience. And yet we find so few people actually build reflection into the routines of their lives. The law of accountability is that accountability is based on well-supported contribution, not obligation, consequences, and punishment. And that one we'll be looking at this strange and wonderful relationship between individual and communal responsibility. And finally, the law of appreciation. That appreciation is the soul of high performance because it brings meaning and resilience and, as Robin is wont to say, joy to the work.
Well, thank you. We hope that something in there piqued your interest, and we will see you in each of those 10 videos or episodes to come. Thank you.